Raechel Whitchurch's first album, Finally Clear, debuted at #1 in the ARIA Country music charts and later went on to have Golden Guitar nominations. Her latest album, What a Time to Be Alive, debuted at #4 in the overall ARIA Australian albums chart. As with Finally Clear, it is a tour de force of heartfelt songwriting and wonderful musicality. Since its release, Raechel has been playing launch shows and she's been to New Zealand with Fanny Lumsden, and that's just in the past couple of weeks. So she's been busy. Hello, Raechel.
Hello, Sophie, and thank you for having me back. I was just saying before we started that this is literally one of my favorite interviews that I do, and I always look forward to it because I feel like, I don't know, you just ask questions that like a real question. I love it. So thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, but I ask real questions because I get real music to talk about, and it's such a pleasure to talk about this album because it is wonderful. And I did have high expectations. It's always that thing of when you love an album, like I love Finally Clear, thinking, okay, well, my expectations are not going to be managed because I love that album a lot. But you have absolutely not just matched it, but moved yourself along as an artist. And that's always a trick, I think, when you have released something that's of high quality, to not just do the same thing again, but actually move yourself along. And you have done that. But I'm interested, before you release an album, whether you feel nervous or excited.
Oh, sickened. Truly sickened. Like, I hate the process leading up to an album. I go through all of the emotions of, did I just fluke it the first time? Like, did just the right people listen to the album? Maybe I just wrote these songs accidentally. Maybe, and you just go through all of the emotions. I don't know if it's similar, for books. You're an amazing author. I don't know if it's a similar thing when you write a great book and then you just like, maybe I just got lucky one time, But yeah, I really struggle with the process, and it's something I've been trying to get better at. But I think in a way it's kind of good. It means you care. It means you care about feeling great out. And I never want to kind of forget that, like, there's people out there who are listening to my music. And so, of course, I want it to feel like me, and I want it to first and foremost represent, what I'm trying to say. But I also want it to be musically pleasing so that other people can find themselves in the songs.
And it is really musically pleasing. And because often I'll just listen to an album first and not listen closely to the lyrics, because I love voices and I love the music. So I'll just put it on. And there were so many moments where I was feeling, even before I listened to the lyrics, the ups and downs of what was going on. So that's to do with how you express yourself as a singer, but also the music that went with it. And you've been releasing singles from this album over the past year and a bit, quite a few singles. And you started with I'm Not Cool, with its excellent cover art. Was there a point where you thought you might actually just keep releasing singles rather than release an album?
Never. I very much believe in the album product, in like a package of songs. And I think that, of course, like, there's many artists who have gone away from that model and they just release singles and it's just song by song. And they kind of like, they vibe how the general public is receiving the songs. And I think sometimes they even alter their songs, oh, that's not working, so I better, shift gears. And I don't really do that. I kind of just write from a period of time, and I write an entire collection of songs, and then I kind of go through and I figure out, which of these songs sort of, marry together and tell the story of this sort of time, and then be like, okay, well, that's the album. And then I start picking, okay, well, how are we going to start telling this story, and what's going to come first and what will come second. And the only exception to that with this album was that I did actually I had a little writing spurt where I wrote a bunch of songs in the middle of last year, and there were 3 songs that weren't actually initially on the record, and I added them at the last minute. And so I normally don't do that, but I felt like when I wrote them, and then I was like, I feel like these are the end, like that completes the story. And so I felt really good about that. So I added them in.
Are they the last 3 songs, or did you see them throughout?
They're actually, surprisingly enough, they're actually Stranger's My Middle Name, which is my current single. Another one was Back Where I Belong, which was my single before, a couple of singles before that. And then one that hasn't been released, a single called Somebody Hurt You.
Okay. Yeah, I can't actually imagine the album without any of those.
Right? That's how I felt. I felt like it kind of, when I wrote them, I was just like, and I think when I wrote the album, I did feel like it had like a real heaviness to it. And so when I wrote those songs from like kind of I mean, Back Where I Belong is obviously it's about moving back to the country after living in Sydney for a decade. And so it's quite, it's a serious song, but it's nice, it's a nice song about moving back to the country. And so I felt like it had softness to it that was missing on the record. And I also just like really love you know, like hardcore trad country, like bluegrass feels. And I had that in my last record, in a bunch of different songs. The most notable one was probably I Used to Think I Was an Owl, which is by radio. And I sort of felt like I hadn't really dug into that very much. And I had heaps of songs that were written in that style, just nothing that fit with that, you know, collection of songs. And so when I wrote Strange Is My Middle Name, I was like, that's the one. That's going to go on the record. And that sort of, you know, brought that, I think, lightness to the album.
Yeah, and Back Where I Belong always makes me smile every time I listen to it. But Strange Is My Middle Name. Yeah, I think those two songs I thought of as almost like the origin story songs that continue the origin story from the last album, if that makes sense. So that was the
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep. And in Back Where I Belong, I actually, and you know, people probably don't listen, you know, very as closely as I do to my lyrics, but in Back Where I Belong, I make a reference to Finally Clear, the song Finally Clear on the record. And I say, you know, I can see the stars at night. I left the city lights behind. And Finally Clear obviously talked about like the idea of when you leave the city lights behind. I hadn't, you know, made that decision yet to leave the country. And so I try and, you know, I wanted it to feel like the part 2 to Finally Clear.
You mentioned the product of the album, and I do think we're in a time where artists who are committed to the art form of the album are thinking of it really seriously as an art form in a way that perhaps they haven't needed to before, because for so many years the album just existed and you made an album. And now it's a conscious decision to make an album. And so you're all, those of you who are making albums, and it's not everyone, thinking about the story of the album, the arc of it, the themes that go into it. So it's an interesting movement, I think.
I think it's probably more prominent in country music or old country Americana specifically. I'm not sure, or maybe it's because of storytelling, you know, like, and I guess like all songs are storytelling, of course. But I really do feel like albums haven't really gone away from country music. If anything, people are putting like, you know, 20 or 30 single albums, which is wild, you know. So it's like, we're going to do less, we're going to do more, we're going to bring more songs. So yeah, I think it's very much still alive and well in country music.
So you've mentioned the last 3 songs that were written for the album. What was the very first song that was written?
Oh my gosh, do you know what? I actually don't even know the answer to that. I feel like that's a really great question. I've got one here. I'm going to have a look and see if I can remember while I'm talking to you. I think, well, actually, that's funny because there's a song on this record called Nothing Makes You Happy. And I rewrote this song. This is a song I wrote when I was like 20. And then I rewrote it for this record because I'd grown and I changed a bunch of lyrics in it. But the premise of the song still felt like I felt like I was feeling all those feelings again. And probably because I wrote it when I lived in Parks for a really brief stint. And then I came back to Parks. So I left the country and then came back to the country. And then I found this song. And I was like, I remember writing it and I felt the feeling was still alive in me, like of like knowing, you know, people who represented that idea. And so I rewrote it with some updates. And so that was probably, you know, the first one I wrote in the sense that I started it, you know, I don't know, over 10 years ago.
Well, I did have a question about that song, but along with Drink Until You're All Right. And the question was along the lines of, it's tempting to think those songs are about the same person, but it sounds like they are.
You know what? And this is so interesting, right? Because someone, and I didn't even, you know, I probably should have thought about it, but there's like kind of like a moment on the album where I'm just looking at it while I'm talking to you, where there's like 3 songs in a row. Nothing Makes You Happy, Drink Until You're Right, Somebody Hurt You. And then I was like, wow, girl goes to a dark place, and that's part of the album, right? She's feeling sad about things.
I think Somebody Hurt You is interesting because it's actually about taking responsibility and for managing the ups and downs of life. And so actually I'm reading what I wrote because I did think very carefully about these questions. And part of what I wrote to do with Nothing Makes You Happy and Drink Until You're All Right was that a lot of your work is about having one eye on the blessings of life and another that acknowledges that life can be very hard. And if we take that idea further about the themes that are in your work, there is a strand of taking responsibility for managing the ups and downs. And I think Somebody Hurt You is a song about that because it's about acknowledging someone's pain, but also making it clear that if they want to heal, they can't keep blaming everyone else for that pain.
Totally. And I think like, I mean, I feel like life is just, if I'm honest with you, I think life's really hard. I think life's just really hard for everyone. And I think people act like it is, and they're probably lying because they just think, we pretend to have control, and really we can't control anything. It happens, and you've just got to find a way to navigate through it. And so it's interesting that you like kind of notice that, but I do think part of the album was me existing with people who all around me who were like doing great, wonderful things and succeeding and, finding success as the world, deems what success is, and still weren't content. And I think, I actually to an interview that you did recently with Tori Forsyth. And I think there's a lot that she said that kind of, like leaned into and understood it, and was like, yeah, I get that. And I think it's a similar vein, right? That I think they make a choice to be happy a lot of the time. Of course, like every person in the world, there's times where life just sucks, right? Like, and that's totally fine. But I do think that, when you see people who are kind of at the top of their game, and they just have all this power and money and whatever it may be, and they're just kind of still not happy, and they're still angry, it kind of begs like, well, what would make you happy? Like, what would it take for you? For me, I find the music industry, a really odd place to exist, and I think fame is a really odd thing. We had this joke because I'm like, yeah, that's why I decided not to be very famous. Like, it's a choice.
Well, to an extent it is, right? Yeah, to an extent.
I mean, sure. No, yeah, but you know what I'm saying, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not a joke my husband and I have. I'm like, yeah, I'm so glad I'm not that famous. But I think, like, yeah, fame is a really interesting thing in this world. And I think it can, make people do crazy things and just kind of never be happy. And so it's something that I care deeply about, is making sure that, my value and my worth is just like found outside of what I do for music. It's just one piece of who I am.
Yeah, and yes, it's definitely, there are decisions to be made around whether you can be content with what you've achieved or not. And also, I mean, this is not about your music necessarily, but I think it's related to the themes of your work. And that was something I was saying to a friend today, which is that I see a lot of pressure put on people to be #blessed and #grateful about all sorts of things in their lives. That it's like, oh well, this is happening to me, but I'm so lucky that it's not X, Y, Z, and we're sort of losing the ability to actually say this sucks and this is hard and calling it what it is. And I do see a lot of women in particular who are feeling like they have to sort of couch everything within, oh no, but I'm actually really grateful, I'm actually really lucky. And so I think where art has such a role is for you calling things what they are, and saying, here are the things I'm laying out that are going wrong. It's your decision as to how you interpret this story, but you have to take responsibility for it one way or another.
Totally. And I think especially with the song Somebody Hurt You, I think I think it's the age old saying, hurt people, right? And that's kind of what I was thinking about when I wrote the song. And I just think, I remember having a conversation years ago with someone and someone in the music industry, and we were talking about the situation where I'd been hurt by someone within the music, or something had happened, and they were like, oh, like you're gonna like do this, or you're gonna like, how are you gonna like reconcile, like what are you gonna do? And I was just like, oh no, I was like, I'm just gonna keep being me, and that means sometimes I'm gonna lose, and that's okay, because I still want to be able to like sleep at night. And so I think that's the thing, right? Is like, if you want to be vulnerable and you want to be who you are, sometimes that means you're just going to lose, and you've got to be okay with that.
I think Back Where I Belong is actually a song about taking responsibility for your own happiness too. So in terms of what I was hearing on the album, it's like there is a lot of that, but also it's not making it seem like it's an onerous thing. It's like, I've taken responsibility to change where I live and I have therefore found happiness. I think that's partly
Totally.
and there's such a great line in it, your true north is way out west.
Yeah, I know. And I love that you said that, because it's truly one of my favorite lyrics on the album. When I wrote that, I was like, yes, I've done it. Like, I was so proud of that lyric. And I was also like sort of like making a little reference, obviously, to James Blundell, obviously, like way out west, like, so I was sort of referencing old school country music and the country, and and also you know, I have this funny story that I tell on stage as well about how when I used to tell people, because I grew up in Broken Hill when I was a kid, and I'd say to people in Sydney, oh yeah, I grew up in far western New South Wales, and they would be like, oh yeah, like Penrith, and I was like, no guys, not Penrith. And so there's got a few little layers of like, you know, with the Way Out West lyric. But you're right, like I think a lot of people live somewhere because they feel they have to live somewhere. I'm lucky that I grew up, you know, obviously obviously in my family, I grew up, you know, in a caravan for a lot of years of my life, and we traveled all around Australia. And so I kind of feel at home really anywhere, you know, and I think like home to me is a very, you know, sort of fluid thing. And so, you know, when we left Sydney, I just all the things that were going to be better about living in the country, you know, financial stress, closer to family, all those things. But it's still hard to do. You know, you have fear and worry around whether you're not making the right decision. You know, we've been working in the music industry is the right decision. But yeah, we've just, you know, we've loved being back in the country again. It's been so beautiful, and our kids are just stoked. They love it here. So.
And logistically, even though, yes, it could be tricky, you're a long way from an airport that's going to connect to capital cities, you've obviously made it work because you do get around.
Yeah, we do. And look, look, it's never, because people are always like, how do you make it work? And you're like, oh, it's hard every time. It's just always hard, you know? And so especially we've got 3 kids now that are 5 and 1, and so we've had to do a lot of traveling this year. Like the older ones like are very happy to have a weekend at their grandparents' house or with, you know, the cousins or whatever, but the baby, like he's like still kind of a baby. And so, you know, we've had to look, he's just, you know, he's been on tour with Ian Moss a lot this year. Him and Ian have done a lot of hanging out, so he's learned a lot of bad habits.
And, you know, Fanny Lumsden, who you know extremely well, you've just been on tour with, of course, has taken her kids on the road from day dot. So.
Totally, yes. And it's so funny because this tour into New Zealand we just did recently was the first one we've ever done together where neither of us had our kids with us. And we were like, what do we do? Like, we got so much spare time. So yeah, it's always tricky. And I think you've just once again, like, you know, yes, it's hard. Are we going to complain or are we going to enjoy it? Like, you know, you got a choice.
I think people who live in the country have a different idea about time as well. So my godmother lives in the Riverina, and driving 6 hours, it's just not even a factor. So sure, I just get in the car. And so that understanding of if someone's in the city, they might think, oh, 6 hours driving, like that, why would you do that? But when you're in the country, I think you just factor time differently. It's like, well, that's the requirement. I'm not going to stress about it. That's just what I need to do to get where I need to be.
Totally. I mean, I've driven so much the last 3 months. I've driven to Broken Hill and back. I drove to Adelaide and back. I drove to Melbourne and back. Like I've so much driving and a lot by myself as well. But it's also really nice, you know. I think one thing that's kind of missing as, you know, the world changes. I remember when I was a kid, there was so much in my life, so many times where I was just like utterly bored. And I think boredom is so important for art. Yeah. And so it's something that with my kids, we're really careful of, just like, we want them to be as bored as possible. Yeah. I just remember being so creative. I remember writing, like, you know, I was writing songs when I was young, a teenager. This was before the days of like you can just record something on your iPhone. I can't tell you how many absolute banger songs I wrote. And then the next morning woke up and was like, I don't remember how it went. I've forgotten the melody, you know? And so it was a different time. And so I think for creativity, we really do need boredom. And so long drives in the car, we've never let our kids have devices in the car, and which sounds like our friends are just like, how? And I'm like, we just never did. And so like they've just gotten used to it. And like, what do you do? I'm like, oh, we have to talk to them and stuff.
Talk to them, revolutionary concept, and maybe they stare out the window the way we did as children.
Exactly, dreaming about the future and what it might hold, you know?
The amount of driving you do does remind me that most Australian country towns, even the really small ones, have car dealerships and mechanics, because you got it.
That's right. We do a lot of driving and a lot of petrol stations, you know, so.
Yes. Do you have a favourite petrol station food that you get on the road?
I'm the worst because I'm one of those people who do anything to not eat takeaway. Like I just hate takeaway food. I think because I ate a lot when I was really young, when I was a kid. So yeah, I'd rather not eat than eat McDonald's or eat, you know, like I just hate it. And so I eat a lot of, you know, bakery food. I do like a good, you know, sandwich or maybe a sausage roll if I'm desperate. But yeah, I'm truly an annoying person to travel with, because I'm like, I'd rather stop at a cafe and wait an extra 20 minutes, get fast food. So I partake in, the Bain Marie quite the way that the Lumsdens do, the Lumsden Freemans do. So
Look, I think it's probably better for your long-term health, just quietly.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although they seem to be doing all right though. So I don't know. Taking a dim sim here and there. I don't know. I'll let you know.
Now, the most recent single from the album was the title track, and in the song, it is clear that the phrase "What a time to be alive" is both literal and ironic. I thought it's the story of you losing a child, and it's not hard listening in that you tell it as a story. You don't actually talk about it as a collection of emotions, if that makes sense. So, I mean, it's hard emotionally in that we are in it with you, but I think it's easy to listen to as a piece of music because of the way you've delivered it. So, when did you decide that you wanted to write about that subject?
I didn't really make a conscious decision. So I think I lost my baby like right before Christmas, a number of years back. I just remember it being right before Christmas, and it just being just like so sad. And I had what's called a miscarriage, and so kind of felt pregnant, looked pregnant, didn't realize my baby had died. And so I found out when I went to an ultrasound, and then I kind of had to wait like 3 more weeks before baby actually, I mean, getting into detailed now. So it was quite a process for me, and I had to really sit in that and think about it, and so it felt really heavy. And then so around Christmas time of that year, like it was just a really sad time. And so I kind of hadn't really consciously decided to write about it, but I remember we were still living in Sydney at the time, and I'd gone home, we got home for Christmas with our other kids, and had gone home, and like I said to my husband, I really want to like bury the baby out in the country. And so like we did that. And then the next day, I kind of was just sitting, we were staying at my in-law's place, because they've got a bigger house. And so we were staying there, and I was just sitting in my room late at night, and I started writing this song. And that didn't even end up being the song. So I immediately went to songwriting, right, to write a song. I wrote this song, and I think the hard thing about the experience was like, I was still grappling with my emotions and how I felt, and there was so much to it. And anyone who listens to the song can hear the story. I won't make go through it all again now. But I think like I was still really grappling with my own emotions and how I felt. And so I didn't actually write What a Time to Be Alive until 9 months later. And I was still really grappling, with it then. And I think it was something about 9 months, later that kind of really like, I don't know, I was just thinking about it and, going through all of those emotions still. And, I think like most, we have this real emphasis in our society, especially in Western, I say very much in Western culture, where we're like, we want people to move through their pain really quickly. I'm not sure why. And we've got this real fear that if people don't move through it quickly, they're going to be forever sad. Like that's the worst thing that we could ever wish upon someone. They're going to be just that sad person. They're just sad forever. And I think what it does is it makes people kind of not allow others to be sad and sit in their emotions. And also then you have to not only carry your sadness, you also have to carry this fear that, oh, I've got to quickly, get through it or whatever. I'm fairly emotionally healthy and very comfortable in just being sad when I'm sad, but I found the process really interesting just from the number of how people dealt with it. And so there wasn't really a space, with friends, family to kind of just sit and just talk it through. And I remember someone had said to me, like they asked me how I was going. This was like, a week later, and they were like, "Oh, hey," and I said, "Oh, like I'm this feel sad and blah blah," and they always said something to the effect of, "Oh, well, you seem like you're getting through it and you're all right," and I was like, "Oh, weird." And I remember just thinking like how much they wanted me to kind of just move through this pain. And so when I wrote this song, I think in a way, the reason I told as the story because I feel like I'm not one really for writing a song that's just a collection of emotions. And it's interesting you said that because I never thought about like that before, but I'm not really the sort of person who would write a song that's just like, I feel this, I feel that. I want to tell people what's happened, and then leave them to decide how they feel about the topic. Right. And so I think the song think I was really just going through and talking about the process, but highlighting all the things that happened, and where, and I think I kind of said all the things that I wasn't able to say, and so I was like, here it is, like, there's a line that's like pretty heavy, but it's like, I wish someone had asked how it felt to birth a body on the floor beside the bath. And so every time I sing that line at gigs, I'm just like, oh girl, why did you have to make it so uncomfortable? It's such an uncomfortable line to sing even. But that's kind of how I felt. I was like, why did no one just ask me? Like, tell me about that. It sucked. Like, I want to hear it. But people, they can't, or they won't, or they don't, or whatever. So that song was really me just saying, here's what happened to me. And you know what? It's happened to a lot of other people. And they have been very grateful to hear someone say it. And so I don't believe in this idea of like, well, it's all worthwhile because this happened. I don't believe in that. Some things is crap, and they're crap, and that's it. And also, from writing that, I've been able to have many amazing conversations with women who've felt stuck in their grief and their pain because no one's ever sat with them before, and that's been really beautiful.
That particular line you just mentioned is really visceral, and it reminded me of an article or a piece rather, that was written by Ariel Levy in the New Yorker years ago, because she had a similar experience, but she was in Mongolia. So she lived in the United States, and she was in Mongolia on a work thing, and suddenly her baby was born dead. Well, not actually dead, lived for a little bit, but in her hotel bathroom. But the fact that I remembered that and connected it with your song shows how rarely those experiences are documented. Amber Lawrence has a song called You Are Mine. When that song came out, I thought, I don't recall hearing this in a song written like this before. Your song came out, but they're the three pieces of art I can point to and say that this experience has been documented. And I think it shows, as you just said, the conversations you've had, how important the role of art is for all sorts of purposes, but to introduce this sort of topic. And you mentioned, Western cultures are very keen for people to move past pain. I'd even more specifically say it's Protestant culture, because in Catholic countries, cemeteries are in the middle of town, where everyone has to deal with death by walking past the cemetery every single day. In Protestant cultures, we put the cemeteries on the outskirts of town. And that means that we're shoving it to the fringes. And what happens in Sydney is, because the big cemeteries are on the fringes of what was originally the town. And of course, now they're in the center of town, but that's actually not something that anyone really wants to deal with. So then they start to get developed into lawn cemeteries and things that look nice, and we don't really have to talk about it. But that is a cultural issue, because within our culture, it feeds into what you experience, which is, oh, well, can't you just be okay now? I don't really want to have this present in my view.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I've never heard it put like that before. And I think it also probably speaks into the idea, well, it's very, you never talk about, what is it, like religion and politics, right? Which is very also like, we don't talk about certain things. I think, like, we don't talk about death, right? We're like and I think it's because people are scared of what they'll find, that maybe they feel a little lost, maybe they feel a little, whatever. So yeah, I think it's all very interesting how we take these things and then we put them away, and so then when someone does go through something like that, we're like, well, what do we do? We don't have the tools. So yeah, it's interesting.
But it's also for you to document it as an experience of your body, because of course what happened, you were growing a human, and it's your body, it's your physical experience as well, and the grief that's attached to someone you haven't given birth to, I think, would be different, actually.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, look, and when I wrote the song, I really never wrote an intention of even it out, right? And that's probably why I was so bold in my lyrics, because I really felt like, oh, I'm just writing this song for me. I just feel crappy about this, and I wrote it. And it was only like when I was sending demos over to my label, and I said, oh, there's this one I put in there, and like, listen to it last, because it's not for the album. It's just, just one, because my label manager, Graham, was like just so kind, and we're very close. And so, knew I'd gone through that. And so I said, it's at the end, and don't, you don't have to listen to it now, just whenever, but it's just not for the album. And then like he listened to it, and he immediately rang me, and he was like, what do you mean it's not for the album? And I was like, oh, Graham, I was like, I don't know how country music radio is going to feel about a song about a dead baby. I don't think it's probably the right vibe. And then, he had a story of his own that he wanted to share with me, and he got really upset. And so I think that was really the first time I'd shared someone, aside from, like, my husband. And then he was like, Raechel, I feel like this song, like, it's really powerful, and I feel like you need to put it out. And so yeah, it took a bit of back and fro and, you know, encouragement from him. And I'm really, you know, I'm glad I did. I think my fear is always, especially in today's day and age, it's always that someone, and I shouldn't care what people think, but I always think someone's going to look at it and think, she just wrote that controversial song to try and, you know, get ahead, or to try and, you know, like that idea, because people do it. People have these, you know, not songs necessarily, but like, you know, anything in, you know, social media, it's all this clickbait, you know, to try and get a reaction from people. And so my fear was always that they're going to think that I've taken something really, you know, like personal, and they're like, you know, bastardized it and turned it into, you know, this sales tool, you know.
Except anyone who's heard the song would know that there's no form of bastardization that has gone on. That is
Totally.
that is completely from the heart. And I think it's also,
Yeah.
you know, the way you've sung it is that you don't shy away from expressing the emotion in your voice. And that means you're not trying to protect the listener from it, but you're also not trying to protect yourself. And I think that speaks to that authentic connection that you're generating between you and the audience, if that makes sense. So it's like, yeah, we're in it together. That's that actually is the way you show it's not clickbait. It's like you are
Yeah.
right in that song.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think I appreciate that. Yeah. Look, it's hard to it was hard to put out, and it's hard to sing sometimes live, but I felt like I'm so glad that I called my album What a Time to Be Alive. And I think it's just, yeah, I'm really grateful that women have entrusted me with, you know, with their stories as I've played it live. It's just been a really, yeah, an honor. So
Yeah, because it goes to the role of art, which is partly to give people permission to tell their stories. And that's obviously what you've done. I think it's also
yeah.
not unrelated to the song Untangled, which you released as a single, in that's about not wanting to become untangled, actually, and that
Yeah.
tangle of life and children and art and all those sorts of things. I mean, art is an entanglement. It is not straightforward. It can pop up at all times of the day and night, and it's not always going to deliver the way you want. But I would imagine that you can't ever imagine being untangled from it.
Totally. Yeah. And I think that yeah, I think there's something beautiful about the illustration of getting, you know, so tangled up in something. Again, you know, I mean, obviously I wrote this song about, you know, being married to my husband. But I think there's something beautiful about envisioning your life with someone as kind of this, you know, entanglement. And I think that is, you know, like it doesn't matter who you are. That's why, you know, when people break up or divorce or separate or whatever, that's why it is so painful, because you're trying to like rip these strands apart that have been tangled up for years and years and years. And so look, my husband's amazing, and you know, and we get along great, have a very similar sense of humor, and some days we want to kill each other. So which I think is very much marriage, right? Like it's just like
That's
some days
made you
like
human.
so annoying. Mostly him to me, if I'm honest. So I'm pretty annoying. So
But yeah, it's just I think it just means it's hard to live with other people, actually.
100%. Well, I think it's like I think that we're mostly just like as human beings, like there's just so many layers upon layers upon layers. You know, even when we think we know ourselves really well, there's always more, you know, to know, and we're triggered by things and whatever. So I think it's but you know, look, I've been really fortunate that I do have a really great husband, and not everyone, you know, has that experience. You know, many people have the experience of getting married. They don't always find like the right person. And so I'm always, you know, hashtag blessed.
Nicely tied in.
Was that the right moment to use that?
It was, because it was a genuine expression. It was.
It was. But I thought you'd enjoy that little bit of tact. So
No, I do like a little tie in there. That's great. So looking ahead, because you have had some gigs and you've already been to New Zealand since you released your album. Do you have some festivals ahead? What's going on for the rest of the year?
yeah, we've got some festivals. We've got one locally in Forbes, the town so from us, called Frost and Fire, which is one I've wanted to play at forever. And it's kind of like an all genres festival. And so Vera Blue is headlining, and we're playing right before her. And she's actually a Forbes local girl, and you know, we're living over in Parks, and so they've got this whole collection of, they have a real focus on artists from within the West, which I'm really excited for. But then of course, like, we're doing the Denny Ute Muster later this year, which is our first time playing there. We've never played at the Denny Ute Muster, and so I'm interested to see how you know, how that event goes. And I've, you know, I've always wanted to go, and I've heard amazing things about it, so I'm keen to do that. And then we have a few other festivals that aren't announced yet that we'll announce soon. But we are planning to have an album tour at the back end of the year as well. And previously, when I released Finally Clear, I did like my album tour with the album at the same time. And I just made a decision this time. I felt like it was so much pressure that it nearly broke me. And so I was like, I am going to do an album tour, but I'm going to save it. I'm going to make them 2 different projects. And I think that's just a great example of like, you know, life changes and, you know, I've got too many kids now, you know, and so I just can't be away from them forever. And you know, I think that's a sacrifice of deciding, you know, because people were like, how do you do it all? And I'm like, well, when you see me succeeding at one thing, I'm probably failing at another thing. Like that's the reality. And so I have to decide, you know, what how much can I handle? How much is, you know, not just me, how much can my family handle, especially because Ben and I both play music as well, so it makes it tricky. So yeah, we're just really thoughtful around our kids and making sure that, you know, and we've tried to kind of keep them away from the music industry a little bit. Like they're very musical and they know we play music, but they don't really understand the scope of, like, you know, they've never been to a festival where we're playing to, you know, thousands of people. They don't really get that. And my daughter just started school this year and she came home a couple of months ago, and she came in and she said, Mum, someone told me something about you at school today. I was like, oh, what? I'm like, oh, juicy gossip. Tell me, girl. And I was like, what did they say? They said you were famous. I was like, oh. I was like, no one told me. And then I was just like, oh, cool. And I was like, do you know what famous is? And she was like, I think it's really cool and beautiful. I was like, exactly. Nailed it.
Well, that's beautiful.
Very cool, very beautiful. Well, that's me.
That's the right answer, yes.
Right? I just don't think that her friends think I'm very cool and beautiful. So it's a funny, yeah, it's a funny little dynamic trying to navigate children and music industry. And I think it's probably the same for many people who have any sort of job that requires them to be, you know, facing the public. So
But look, you're going to the Denny Ute muster, which I would imagine means you can just put the children in the tray of a ute and cover them with a tarp and take them down.
perfect, right? They can just stay in the car the whole time for all I care. Just rolling around in that ute. So it's going to be great. I can't wait.
The Denny Ute muster actually scares me a little. I just envisage all of these utes everywhere doing circles. I don't know, throwing up dust.
I know, right? I've never been. I'm so excited. I mean, I think, look, I did grow up, you know, like I said, in quite, you know, country Australia, and so I feel like I'm kind of going to love it. I think it's going to be amazing. And I've tried to with festivals, I've actually tried to not go to festivals until I'm playing at them, which sounds like funny, but I always feel like I like, you know, it's interesting when you go somewhere and your first experience of that festival is kind of, you know, getting to, you know, see it from the perspective of a performer. But also I just feel like I don't want to line up for a toilet anymore. I'm too old.
Oh, look, I totally understand. But the good thing as an artist is you don't have to. Of course, you've got to pass.
That's right.
Gets you into a special toilet.
Exactly. I want the special toilets, especially at the Denny Ute Master.
Look, I think that is a great note on which to end this conversation, Rach. Because also people should go off and listen to the album, which is What a Time to Be Alive. And while you're there, if you have not listened to Finally Clear, you can do that as well. And in the meantime, Raechel Whitchurch, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me, Soph. And again, I say it to you, but I really do appreciate you putting so much work into the questions you ask, because I can always tell that you've listened to the songs, and that means a lot to me. So thank you.
Thank you.